Thank you very much. So yes, now I'm no longer with Rainbow Council. I'm with the Australian Centre of Excellence for Local Government, and I'll tell you a little bit about ACEL because it's important that you understand where we sit. ACEL is a unique collaboration of universities and bodies committed to the advancement of local government. We're federally funded, and our charter is to improve local government nationally. So we have a vision. We have to have a vision because when the federal government gives you lots of money, one of the boxes you have to tick is if they've given us a vision. Good. So obviously our vision is world-class local government. Well, we're not going to say we just want okay local government, you know, good enough to be going on with. But to meet the emerging challenges of the 21st century, and that's a really important part because the emerging challenges for local government are many and varied, and some of them are being met head on, and some of them are like the elephant in the room, where people go, no, I can't see it. ACEL's program areas are predominantly research and policy foresight. Can I just say, having sat through the fantastic presentations yesterday and ticked off every single thing I was going to say in this presentation, I decided very late last night to completely rewrite the presentation, which I did on my Android tablet, which was a more difficult process than I'd anticipated. And one of the reasons it was difficult was because it didn't have spell check, and the other reason it was difficult is because it doesn't print. And while I'm young enough to have embraced new technology wholeheartedly, I'm old enough for some reason only to be able to proofread on paper. So I apologise in advance for the terrible typos, which of course I can see now, but I see them at 10 o'clock last night, 9:09. So there you go. Innovation and best practice, so innovation with two ends. Governance, strategic leadership, organisation capacity building, remote rural and Indigenous local government, because the challenges there are very different to challenges that some of you might experience. And workforce development, because that is a really big issue for local government, particularly in terms of the ageing workforce. All of your councils will have an older workforce, many of whom are ready to retire, and that's a real issue for you for knowledge management as well as just how you're going to replace them. So the challenges facing local government, particularly in relation to knowledge management, are the very diverse range of services that local government offers, and you know, anything from 60 to 120 bog standard services that your community has a right to expect are delivered all the time. The ageing workforce that I spoke about, legislative requirements from a whole range of different areas. Somebody mentioned before about having 600 different timing requirements on retention for documents. That's just a nightmare. If people really sat down and understood the sort of the hodgepodge of legislation that governs local government, the different areas that it comes in, they would understand that it's a miracle sometimes that local government even gets up in the morning, let alone manages to do what it does. The volume of records that local government has to manage routinely, and the records and the diverse form those records come in, because really every little bit of information or data that comes in, however it comes in, is a record. But also importantly for knowledge management, it's the diverse workforce, and this is what I really want to focus on today, because I don't think that's been touched on so much, and that is the diverse levels of education in your council workforce, diverse levels of literacy. Literacy is a real issue in some areas of council workforces, and computer skills. And not in the areas that you might think either, because we make assumptions about older staff not being able to use computers. Council staff, what do they know about computers? That's not necessarily true. But some of your CEOs with, 2 or 3 degrees will still be getting their PAs to open their emails for them and print them off because, they don't have time for that stuff. So this is the Donald Rumsfeld quote about knowledge, and it's worth revisiting because there is a little nugget of truth in there. I don't know what he was thinking when he said it. I don't suppose he knows what he was thinking when he said it. There are known knowns, and these are things that we know. Okay, there are known unknowns. That is to say, there are things we know that we don't know, and that's true too. But there are also unknown unknowns, and that's actually true, and it's really important to remember. There are things we don't know that we don't know. And that information will be available somewhere. We don't even know that we don't know it, so we need to know that somehow, if it crops up, we can somehow find it. We also know that social media is increasingly being used by local government, but often in an old media way. So that means the communications department say, oh yeah, so we're totally on board with Twitter and Facebook, we are down with it, and we will put all of our information about our events on it. And we'll say, okay people, it's time to pay your taxes, smiley face. And so, don't talk to me about social media because we're there. Half of councils, though, they don't let their staff access social media networks from work. Okay, so what does that say? It says, A, we're going to use the command and control way of using social media just to put information out there. The biggest risk they see with social media is that someone will say something not very nice about them on Facebook. Well, that's not a bad thing. People, if there's something not nice to say about them, people are saying it anyway. At least if they're saying it on your Facebook page, you can see what they're saying, you know what they're talking about, and you can do something about it. Like Dom's example of that waste. How good was it that finally it came up in a Google search and council was galvanised to action? How appalling was it that it had to go that far? But if they're saying the bad things about you in your area, on your turf, then you are able to do something about it, so that's not a bad thing. The community is looking to have a conversation with council with social media. They're not looking to get press releases on their iPhone. Okay, so it's really important, I think, that councils understand that. With regard to staff accessing social media networks, I really struggle with that whole notion that you should block those things. You don't block staff from answering the telephone. Staff can say stuff to the community all the time, and we assume that that's governed by a code of conduct that all staff are governed by. I don't really understand why the use of social media couldn't be governed by the same code of conduct, why you wouldn't extend the same trust to your staff re social media, as you would on the telephone. A very senior manager in our council said to me one day, social media, no way, that is so dangerous, that's just out there. Once you've said something, it's out there in the world. He said, I have been having a fight with this BITCH for months over a particular issue in our council, and we have exchanged probably 45 emails, and I have seriously told her what to do with her problem. Imagine if that was public. Okay, these are the people who make decisions about whether councils should be using social media. Imagine if email was public. Imagine if she could perhaps forward the email to a newspaper or cut and paste the content and put it somewhere else. He had no idea. These are things to think about, okay? When people get anxious about social media, think about the risk of not doing it as well as the risk of doing it. I don't want to dwell on records management per se. I think you've all been pretty severely knocked around the heads, and you've got a lot of information to take home and think about. The thing I would say about records management is that it is clunky, and I like the notion that IT might come to the party, because at the moment I think the IT for records management is really almost unmanageable. It just makes it a very difficult thing to do. It's expensive. There are a few companies out there make $1 million out of it, and they make $1 million particularly out of making systems that they know won't talk to other systems. So once you've got that system, you're locked in. I think there are other ways of doing that too, and I think that will be a benefit that comes from councils, is that you might move away from that model into a sort of a more open, more flexible model of IT. I'll give you a couple of examples of where apps have worked really well. Apps that have been developed outside local government have worked really well for local government. Has anyone heard of planning alerts? Okay, some of you have. So Planning Alerts was developed by a charity, in fact. They look at making the nexus between government and community easier. That's what they do. Planning Alerts is an app that it scrapes councils' websites. Okay, it pulls down data about DAs from the websites. You can sign up to planning alerts for nothing as a resident. You can say, oh, always tell me if a planning alert comes in this radius, in this street, is of this nature, and it'll just ping you and say, oh, planning alert's been, DO's been lodged in this council for this. And when it first came out, councils went, oh, they're taking information off our website. That's our information. Well, it's not their information, it's everybody's information. It's there to be shared. There was a lot of anxiety about it. And then one day, Pittwater Council in New South Wales went, hey, that's actually really useful. That would be useful for us and useful for our community. So now, Pittwater Council have planning alerts on their website. That is how they tell people about the DAs. People sign up to planning alerts, they get an alert whenever something happens in their area, whenever a DA of a particular nature is lodged, and now they also use it inside the council. So anyone who has an interest in a particular type of DA, instead of having to wait until the planning department tells them that it's come through, they just get a ping with planning alerts as well. Okay, so that's working for everybody. Fix My Street, have you heard of Fix My Street? Okay, so Fix My Street is another free app. You can get it on Android, you can get it on iPhone. Fix My Street says, I can be walking anywhere in Australia and I can see pothole, dead dog, uncollected garbage, broken playground equipment, you know, all of those things that people talk to council about. And I can say, oh, I don't like that. I can take a picture of it with my phone. I can open up Fix My Street, take a picture of it with my phone. My phone knows exactly what council area I'm in at the time. I don't have to know that. It will send a report from my phone with my details to that council saying, oh, here's this dangerous bit of playground equipment. Perhaps you'd like to fix it. The council then responds by saying, thanks, we've got that and we're looking after it, and they will then tell you, mostly, what they're going to do about it. So councils went, oh God, no, we'll be inundated with people with iPhones sending us pictures of things that we can't do anything about. And that didn't happen, but they did get some really useful things. It's good for councils to know that they need to fix dangerous playground equipment. But what I wanted to tell you about it was that there was a council in Western New South Wales who were grappling with the notion of how they were going to give their rangers, their regulatory staff, and the people who just go around and check things for council. They were going to give them PDAs, they were going to lock them into, somehow get them to log into council's own record system electronically. That was going to be a bit difficult, it was going to cost them an awful lot of money, and someone went, oh, why don't we just give them an iPhone with Fix My Street on it? And so that's what happened. All of the outdoor staff who routinely go around looking at things have an iPhone with Fix My Street. They see something, they open Fix My Street, and oh, there it is. Council knows who it's come from, it just gets logged in the normal way. It costs nothing except the iPhones, and they use that for other stuff anyway. But it became a really good tool for the council. So the other one I wanted to talk about really briefly is something called Council Gripe, and I don't know whether you have that down here. In New South Wales, the local papers run it, and we all know how well council and local papers get on, and what good friends they are. So you can imagine that the local papers set that up really to support councils and help them in their work. So Council Gripe is a place where people who read the local paper can go on and say, my bloody council didn't do this properly, or my council didn't do that properly. And it's really interesting to read, because some councils went, okay, well if they're putting out this stuff, we should really reply to it and respond, and other councils ignored it. And the councils who reply and respond to it doesn't take a lot of time, they don't get many complaints, and mostly it is just a matter of giving people the information they need to understand the problem in context. Or if the council's done something wrong, it's a matter of actually going, oops, sorry, my bad, won't happen again. And that just takes away any of the sort of the animosity out of the argument, just acknowledging you did something wrong. So it's an interesting one to look at, and councils who don't respond, the anger just builds and builds, and more people come on board and say bad things about the council. Anybody who ever had any bad experience with council is suddenly there. So it's an interesting thing. Responding makes you more human. All of a sudden you're having a conversation, people are civil about it, and it sort of just takes away the animosity. So other challenges for you guys are changes to the Freedom of Information Act, the need for web compliance and accessibility guidelines, and possibly not having PDFs anymore. Yay. And all state and federal records departments are working on and developing guidelines for the retention of social media records. That's another big barrier to councils using social media. I hear that a lot. How would we maintain those records? And there are ways, and there will be guidelines if your state records department hasn't already issued them. Has anyone heard of BYOD? Yeah? A couple of people. Okay, BYOD is bring your own device. And does anyone have a council that has a BYOD policy? Yeah? And how does that work?
They've only just started to implement it now. So
okay.
Yeah.
It's good that they're thinking about it, because bring your own device means that's my smartphone. I take that to work all the time. I do work on my computer, I do work on my smartphone. If there's an app that'll do it for me, I'm doing it on the app. If I'm looking something up, I might be, if my system's faster than the computer, I don't know how that would happen. I might look something up on my phone. I tweet on my phone. I do a whole lot of stuff, so I mix and match how I use things. And in my organisation now, that's fine. There's a clear understanding that that'll happen. There are some rules, again, some basic code of conduct rules about what can and can't be done. It's crazy to say today for a council who says no staff can access social networks during work time. If you think they're not sitting there with their iPhones, Facebooking, tweeting, doing those things, then that's probably a little bit naive. So really a BYOD policy is quite important in terms of looking at how you might do that. I heard somebody in this space say the other day, which I thought was really interesting, that people will take more care, so they're putting council information on their iPhone, okay, on their iPhone, not the BlackBerry we've given them, no. And he said, you know, people will take so much more care of an iPhone that's got photos of their kids, their wedding photos, their favourite playlists of music, it's got their Facebook all there, then they're going to take of the council provided BlackBerries. So if you think that's the risk, it's not. Okay, they will take more care of your information because it's on a thing that they care about than they will if it's on a thing that frankly they don't really like anyway. So that's the thing to think about with BYOD. So what I really want to talk about is the fact that it's the people. Okay, many of your colleagues in councils don't see themselves as knowledge workers. Really? Who uses that term, knowledge workers? How many of you are knowledge workers? How many would see council as a knowledge organisation? If you went back to staff and said, you know, how would you rate council as a knowledge organisation? And how many term even what they know as knowledge? Probably not that many, because knowledge isn't like, it's not a thing people, it seems to be a formal construct for people. Wikipedia says, and I'll get back to Wikipedia in a minute, that knowledge is just familiarity with something or someone, can include facts, information or skills acquired through experience or education. And that's a really important thing to remember. It isn't just that formal thing you learn when you go to university, when you go to school, when you come to something like this and someone like me stands up in front of you, okay? Knowledge is acquired in many, many different ways. So what's really important in council for good knowledge management is to create an environment where knowledge of all shapes and sizes is shared. Okay, so there's big knowledge, really big knowledge that everybody knows about, gets shared automatically in council, and then there are little nuggets of knowledge that people just know. They apply it to stuff, but they don't think it's important enough to pass on to anyone, okay? So what you need to do is assume you need to create an environment where all of that knowledge can be passed around. Don't assume that people only have knowledge and skills in their work area, because people have many career changes, people have many interests outside of work. develop an online corporate FAQ so that all those bits of information, the frequently asked questions from anywhere, are all in one place that people can access, whether it's in your intranet, however you do that. And value storytelling and create opportunities through intranets, brown bag talks, etc. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about how you might do that. A skills audit is a really good place to start for councils because people have a whole range of skills that they're not necessarily applying to their current job. When you put a project team together, as it was discussed yesterday, it's really important to have diversity on that team, okay? If you ask a bunch of surgeons how to treat a medical problem, what are they going to say? They're going to say operate. Okay? That's not what you want. If you ask a bunch of engineers, you know, how people can get from one side of a river to another, they're going to say, hello, you build a bridge. But that might not actually be the most sensible solution. It may be that people have to drive, it may be a boat, who knows, it may be that you put whatever it is they want to get to on the other side, on that side of the river. There's lots of different ways of doing it, so you need to have diversity on the team so they'll all bring that experience to it. Get people to do environmental scans in whatever area they work in and report the results of those environmental scans back to their teams, because that's the way of getting people to think. It's a way of people to start thinking about accessing knowledge from outside the organisation and disseminating it. Internal communities of practice for big councils. For small councils, that's not so practical, but it's certainly worth thinking about. I love the idea of play dates. Get people, whatever their job is, to talk to the person who does that job in the neighbouring council. Okay, have them over for the day. Get them to spend a bit of time seeing how you do stuff and then tell you how they might do it differently, how they do it differently in their organisation. Go back to their council, see how that works. People who go to conferences, any conferences, anywhere, get them to write reports. You should all be going back, writing a report that's sent out to all staff, saying these are my learnings from this conference and here's a link, this is where you can go and get more information about it. Innovation programs are really important, but don't set up an innovation program and say, okay, now you have to innovate, because that really doesn't work. You need to have, innovation needs to be small as well as big. It doesn't all have to be transformational. It doesn't have to change council as we know it. It might just be a better mousetrap, okay? Or am I using a mousetrap for a different purpose? It's also really important if you're looking at innovation to understand people need to be able to fail, and you need to make that so clear because people are terrified. If you're only looking for innovations that you know will work, then that really defeats the purpose of an innovation program. The other thing you need to be aware of is the style of leadership in the organisation, because when I ran an innovation program at Randwick, we had a really charismatic GM, really charismatic, fantastic GM, did great things for the organisation, but very charismatic. So charismatic, in fact, that everybody walked around, figuratively speaking, with what would Ray do, tattooed on their wrist, like they do in Middle America with Jesus. So whenever anybody was thinking of any sort of innovation, they were self-limiting by going, oh, I'm Ray thinking, oh, Ray wouldn't like that, so they never put it up. So you need to think about those things if you're looking at an innovation program. And you need to involve staff in the development and delivery of training. And at Randwick we put together a program called All Stops to Randwick. We modelled it around a bus trip. But what happened the first time was that we modelled it on the Code of Conduct. Everybody had to have training on Code of Conduct, on different aspects of the Code of Conduct. And so we set up, I think it was 8 lectures to be run 3 times each over 3 days, 6 times each over 3 days. And we've got everybody in council involved in giving the lectures, designing them and giving the training, as well as going into them. So people who had expertise in particular areas developed up the training. And then we bussed everybody in over different times. People got a passport, they had to get stamped for every lecture. We put catered lunches on in the outdoor area. We had a number of organisations come, and during the lunch hour they took people's blood pressure, they talked about safety at work. There were a whole range of interesting things that they did. We had a few outside people come. But everybody came together and every session was interactive. So every single staff member met every other single staff member at some point during those 3 days and talked to them. And they were mixed up, so the sessions weren't They weren't set up by silo, by seniority, by outdoor versus indoor, none of those things. People just were randomly in the same room in an interactive session looking at a particular aspect of the code of conduct training. So they were working together, they were talking together. It was a tremendous thing in terms of team building and community building within the organisation. It was a terrific thing in terms of learning outside the core things that we were trying to teach, and also in enabling people who wouldn't have thought that they actually had any knowledge to share what they knew, to become experts in something, and then to become the go-to people in the organisation, just if people ever had questions about things. It cost about, I think it cost, the first one cost about $60 per head, which for training is actually very cheap. It was a big thing to organise, but they had an L&D department. They've done that every year since, and they take a different focus every year, but there was an element of code of conduct training in it. Don't take gifts, that sort of thing, declare everything over $50. No, if they offer you a holiday, hello. Yes, that is corrupt. So there's a bit of that, but then, so the next one was about risk management and all of the things associated with that. Each year has a different thing, but that's gone on. So build knowledge capabilities. Don't assume that people know stuff. Use Yammer within your organisation, because it's good practice for people when they're using Twitter later. It's also a way of sharing information and keeping records. Teach people how to use the internet. Teach people how to use Google. I used to run a course, and it was amazing. Like, people didn't have to come; they just went. Some people went because it got them out of work for a day. Other people went because they were, oh, actually, maybe I don't understand this. And word of mouth built it into a very popular course. People don't know when they search that the first thing that comes up, that's actually a paid link. I had people who use Google all the time go, oh, really? I had no idea. That's very scary. The problems also are often not where you expect them. So the people who come in and say, oh, look, I'm not really across this stuff, actually probably know a bit about it, because sometimes they make a point of, they understand that their knowledge is limited, so they learn about it. People say, oh yeah, no, I'm completely across that. They're the ones who go, you're kidding me, paid? I had no idea. Teach them how to use Wikipedia. Like, people use Wikipedia all the time, and some of it's good and some of it isn't good. Teach them how to tell the difference. Give people tools so they can evaluate information. There's been a lot of talk about the amount of data, just stuff, the amount of information that's out there now. If you Google anything you're interested in, there's like 1 million hits. You could just go down that rabbit hole and then come out. People need to understand how to evaluate that information, so you need to teach them critical thinking. You need to teach them basic statistics. You need to teach them that Excel is a scary, evil thing and will always give you a number in a box, but it will never tell you whether it's right or not. And so, at one point, Randwick Council confidently claimed in all of the material it put out about the council that 27 million people visited its beaches every year. And I went, really? 27 million people? And the earth sort of tilted a bit on it and said, that seems an awful lot. Oh, no, they said, we scientifically assessed that. It just doesn't seem right to me. I don't know how you could fit 27, and they were nice beaches, but not really big. And so it turned out that what had happened was that the beach staff, they'd gone to the beach, they'd pegged out half of a beach, and for, 3 or 4 days, they'd counted the number in the middle of summer. They counted the number of people on that beach between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Then they'd multiply that by 2 for that beach, and then they'd multiply that by 714 for the other beaches, and then they'd multiply that by 365. 27 million unique visitors to the beaches every year. And they could show me the worksheet they'd used for it. So it's really important to assess people's knowledge. Don't say, I'm going to teach you how to do this. Just say, who wants to go to a bit of a refresher course on statistics. Who wants to go to a bit of a refresher? It'll start off small, but if you do it properly, then a word of mouth will get around and you will have people queuing up to come to those things. It's really important. You get them to bring reports. So, bring me a report. I'm nearly done. Bring me a report that you produce all the time and I'll have a look at it for you. And they bring you in their report and you say, what's this for? And they say, oh, it's for John. No, but what is it for? Well, no, it's John gets it every month. What does John do with it? Or he puts it in the report that goes, and what do they do? I don't know. How long have you been doing it? 14 years. Why have you been doing it? Well, because when I came, Mark used to do it, and John said, okay, now it's your job to do this. Okay. Do you imagine they might be using that information for? Oh, I don't know. It's not my job to imagine. It's my job to put the numbers in. So you go to the director, what do you do with this report? Oh, it just goes in the back of the thing. So when we are drowning in information, it's also really important to jettison some information that we don't need and say, well, you know what, that's a complete crock. So let's get rid of that. But it might be useful for you to know this, and we can give you this, and actually if you monitor that monthly or quarterly, that'll tell you something. You can learn something about it. So be really careful about evaluating the information that you do have, because some of it's probably rubbish. Not in your councils, other councils, obviously. Can I have 2 more minutes just to talk about retaining existing knowledge? You all have an ageing workforce. You all have a lot of people who are either getting ready to retire or who are going, no, don't make me. Either way, they are going to leave the organisation. And some of them are quite senior and some of them are not, but regardless of that, some of them will be in key positions. Some of them will just be the people you know stuff. And if you just let them, they're just going to walk out of the organisation and take that stuff with them. So you need to identify long before they retire who they are. And then you need to sort of anoint them as experts. Because it's really, what's really awful is to go up and say, oi, you can't walk out with all that knowledge. We just need you to write down everything you know. Well, how is that going to work? And they're going to go, well, bugger you. It took me 30 years to learn, but you can bloody go off and spend 30 years learning it yourself. That's not what you want to happen. You want to go, obviously you're an expert in such and such, it would be really great if you could share some of that knowledge with us. And here's your team. If you could just work out between you all how best to access that information, that would be great. So you have a community of practice or a team, and they can do a number of things. They can do interview sessions, they can video the person doing their job and talking about it. They can have written work programs. They can do on-site demonstrations. There are lots and lots of things that they can do. But the way that this works best is if the team decides with the expert what's going to work best for them, not for HR or organisational performance going, well, here's this model and that's what you have to do. Okay? You need them to own it, you need them to say this is how it's going to be, and then you need the whole organisation to recognise the importance of that process. So you need the organisation to know that it's going on, so you need to talk about it on your intranet, so you need to say, this is Steve, here's our expert in blah, and this is what he's doing. And this is how he's doing it. And that sends a number of messages. It sends a message to Steve that says, I better do it pretty well because everyone's watching. It sends a message to young John over there who's only, 24, 25, might be thinking about whether he wants to jump ship, whether he wants to go somewhere else. He's going, well, they really value people who stay. They really value the knowledge that we have, and they value our expertise, so maybe I'll stay. Or maybe I'll go and then I'll come back when I've got some other knowledge to bring back. So that's also a useful thing. So you need to recognise the importance of the program by peers and also by management. So you need the GM going, this is Steve, he is our expert. He's telling me stuff I didn't know. Okay? And that's how, obviously there's a hell of a lot more to it than that, but if you just sort of take away that notion that it should be partly self-driven, that it's about expertise and knowledge, that it's about recognising importance and allowing people to drive their own process, then I think that's probably a really good starting place. for you to do. And I think, yes, there would be my question page. So thanks for putting up with me, and if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.